Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Defender podcast. I'm Koos, and I'm joined once again by my friend from the Netherlands, Koos.
Hey Chris, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. Yes, it is evening here in Sydney, and it's been very hot. And I think this is a very weird concept for a lot of folks who are not in our hemisphere. But when it's 40 degrees Celsius and it's this close to Christmas, it gets really interesting. It's very much beach weather over here. So
Yeah, and it's like a little over 6 p.m. at your end, right? And it's a little over 8 a.m. in the morning in Amsterdam time. So while the sun is still shining bright through your blinds there in the back, I'm still here looking at a pitch black outdoorsy situation over here. So that's really weird.
Crazy, and the wonders of modern technology, right? So
yeah.
So in today's episode, we're going to do or at least attempt to do a little bit of a recap of Ignite 2024 that happened just recently in Chicago. I was lucky enough to be in Chicago for Ignite. It was interesting, to say the least. The weather was fantastically crazy, with snowstorms and things like that, which I am obviously not used to and built for. So exciting times. Talking about Ignite, not a lot in terms of security announcements from Ignite.
No.
I guess everyone probably expects or assumes that Ignite was very much focused around AI and Copilot.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, really, that was the case. It was very much a Copilot event. But nonetheless, there were some interesting things, on the security side of things that were announced. So I'm going to take a look at some of the announcements on Intune and Entra. And then, Koos, you've got a few other things that you wanted to talk about as well, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I actually went through the Ignite book of news once again to refresh my mind what was actually announced. And I wanted to share a couple of fun facts first, Chris. I looked up the terms Copilot and AI, and how many times do you think those words popped up in the book of news?
I'd imagine quite a lot, right?
Well, hundreds of times each one. So it was really crazy. It looks like every line was filled with Copilot and AI. And also, those events are quite infamous for their feature or product renames, right? So we didn't went back to Azure AD yet.
Damn it!
We're still hoping for that one, I guess.
Still hoping for that one, yeah.
So, but we only got 2 product renames. I think that's a low score, I guess.
Yeah, pretty low score. They're maybe they're waiting for some of the other conferences or things next year to drop some more on us. But what did we get renamed out of interest sake?
Yeah, well, one rename was based around Azure Stack HCI, so that is running your Azure locally, so to speak. So Azure Virtual Desktop for Azure Stack HCI was now renamed to Azure Virtual Desktop for Azure Local. So apparently they're more emphasizing the Azure Local product name instead of Azure Stack from the past. And also there was a rename in the Purview section. So Microsoft Purview Data Catalog has been renamed to Purview Unified Catalog. And I actually heard from 2 colleagues who were recording a demo for a session. And from one day to another, they were like, where is the data catalog? I cannot find it anymore. They were looking over it, and the rename has already been applied in their tenant. So they had to figure out that it's now called Unified Catalog.
Yes, and it shifted way down from being way at the top with D to way down at the bottom with U, right?
Yeah, that's also true. I'm not familiar with the interface. I'm not really sure what it would look like, but yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Yeah. So
okay. Nothing special on that end.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, I guess if we get into it, let's take a look at some of the Entra announcements. And I think, it should come as no surprise that, some of what was announced as far as Entra and Intune, in fact, as well, at Ignite, is very much geared around Copilot, right? So really, we're going to start seeing this, and I expect we're going to see this across the board. And this is really just the beginning of it, but we're going to start seeing Microsoft Security Copilot surfacing in more places within the portals, right? All of the management portals. And so they've made sort of an announcement around Intune, and we're going to see a lot more of that Security Copilot stuff being integrated and surfacing in Intune. The main parts of the integration, I think, are sort of in the advanced analytics piece. So being able to use natural language to help with your KQL queries. I think it's pretty powerful stuff, I think, if you're not if you're not natural or you're not super familiar with KQL and you don't use it on a daily basis, being able to naturally sort of speak or type a prompt in natural language for something and then have that KQL query given and generated for you, I could see that being really useful for folks. So I think
it
that's
really works well as well.
Yeah.
I tinkered with it a little bit when Security Copilot or Copilot for Security, when it was called back then, another rename by the way, was in early days, and the results were not that good. But I did some tests lately, and it was really good actually. And it's also good to help you understand what data lives in what table, right? So there are so many tables in Defender, and when you ask Copilot, but also ChatGPT, for example, it knows which tables to search for certain data, which is already very useful to start with. That's
one of the biggest barriers to entry, right? To get into to writing these queries is just knowing what you're querying. So I think that's pretty awesome. That's something that got announced. There's some sort of Copilot insights coming into the endpoint privilege management stuff, the EPM. Again, I think this is kind of useful. If you're using endpoint privilege management, and I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of customers who've kind of gone down this route just yet. But essentially, what it is for those folks who don't know is if you have elevated prompts, you're trying to install software, for example, on Windows 10 or Windows 11, and you get that prompt for elevation for the software, that goes into like a workflow, an admin workflow, where an administrator can take a look at, the application that's being installed and decide to grant you access to that elevation. And Copilot is now sort of enriching that prompt, right? So it can now take the hash of the application that's being installed and go and have a look and see whether there's some, malware or something that is known to exist in this. And I think this can be really useful for large orgs where you may already have this workflow. And then, building this sort of Copilot enhanced capability onto that, I think will be really handy for some. Policy management is another area where we're going to see Copilot surface. Again, I think this is kind of useful. I build a lot of Intune policies, and I spend a lot of time sort of in the policy editor. And how I normally do it is I have policy editor open in one tab, and I have another tab open to the Intune documentation on Learn. And then if I'm trying to figure out an exact setting, that's I'm looking that up on Learn to make sure that I've got the right thing, and I'm able to configure the right thing and making sure that I'm configuring it in the right way, right? Well, with this sort of Intune surfacing in there now, you can actually get better insights, I think, into what a specific policy does by just clicking the little Copilot button in Intune. I think that can be really useful, especially if you've got a lot of policies and it's contextual. So it'll tell you if you have this setting configured in a different policy, or if there's likely to be a conflict or anything like that. So, I think that's cool. I think it's going to be, make folks' lives a little easier. And then the last area I think where we're going to see some or where they've announced some sort of integrations is on auto patch. So again, if you auto patching or using auto patch to update your Windows 10 or Windows 11 machines, you're now going to be able to get that sort of Copilot sort of insights, if you will, into that process where you can, if you wanted to go and find out which machines don't have a specific update applied yet, or figure out why there are issues with a specific update applying to some of your fleet or stuff like that, right? It's going to be very sort of contextual to your environment. So, all in all, I think it's going to be useful for a lot of folks. I think it's going to take a little bit of getting used to for a lot of people as well, if you're not used to doing this daily. But I think as you start seeing this as an easy button, probably going to be quite useful. So
so maybe we should spend a separate episode on this, Chris. But does everyone with an M365 Copilot license automatically receives these abilities in their tenant?
You know what? That is a very good question. You have to have Security Copilot enabled in your tenant to surface this. Right?
Yeah, so that's a separate service. So for people listening in, Microsoft 365 Copilot is your Copilot for Word, Excel, Teams, Outlook, all that stuff, even Power Apps and such. But for all the security stuff, you have to deploy an Azure resource, in fact, which is a Security Copilot SCU. It's a security compute unit or something like that.
Right.
And you have to pay for that separately, depending on how much you use it, how much you prompt it, how much you make it to set it, make it to work. And that's also the element you need for Defender, but it's also the same resource that is utilized for the Entra and Intune integrations.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good call out, right? Is that obviously with all of these cool features comes additional licensing in some instances, right? And again, we talked about sort of endpoint privilege management and the Intune advanced analytics stuff. That's all part of Intune Suite, which is not Intune, but it is available as an add-on or as Intune Suite if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So.
And it might be a bit confusing that Intune has its own portal, Defender has its own portal, Entra ID has its own portal, but still the security copilot is managed in a completely different portal, the Azure portal. So that's
right.
Good to know.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're doing here, right? Is with a lot of these integrations, is they're starting to bring some of that stuff from the security copilot portal, if you will, and just sort of surfacing that into the admin panels that folks are already using, right? So, because I think one of the challenges here is, if you take aside the licensing implications and the costs, right? Because sometimes as techies, we don't care about the costs, like we're not directly paying them, right? But what we do care about is having to have 6 portals open to do one thing. And so now if they start surfacing some of this sort of goodness, I guess, if you will, into the portals that we already use, hey, we're so much more likely to start using it now because we're not jumping to yet another portal. So
yeah, that's true. And you're actually building a great bridge there, Chris, to my subject of the day. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about Defender XDR and everything that's new. A couple of things that are new at least. And I think it's funny. I think most people, especially outside the Microsoft security space, when you think about Defender, some might still think about Defender for endpoint only, right? But XDR, as most people probably know, stands for cross detection and response. And Defender XDR is actually the whole defense suite with quote unquote all the defenders, right? So Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, Identity, Cloud Apps, Entra ID, Identity Protection, everything is now finally integrated into one portal, because not long ago we had separate portals for all of those products as well, right? Defender for Identity, Endpoint, Azure Security Center, which is still there, but everything is now at least integrated in a single portal. And last year, Microsoft already made some effort in unification of all those portals, and then they actually rebranded it the Unified Security Operations Platform, which is a fancy name of security.microsoft.com, for which we probably most of us know it. And last year, also Sentinel was added at the same time together with that rename. So Sentinel, as you know, is an Azure resource, a log analytics workspace living in Azure, but it's now also integrated in the Unified Security Operations Platform as well. And I think that's great, because now you have one place where you can find all your incidents. You have one place where you can do that advanced hunting you were mentioning as well, the KQL stuff. And now you can look through all the tables from Defender and Sentinel. But a couple of things were still missing there. And it was not really an actual Ignite launch. It was a couple of weeks later, I guess. But now finally workbooks are also available there in the Defender portal. So Azure Workbooks is actually an Azure resource, but it's quite relevant to log analytics and also Sentinel to build dashboards. And so Microsoft has plenty of templates for you to visualize how many users are using MFA, or how many incidents you got in the last year on a daily basis, or a lot of useful stuff there. And I think it's great that you don't need to branch back to the Azure portal to see those dashboards, and you now have them in the Defender portal. Another thing that was announced during Ignite is that now Sentinel will also be available to customers who do not use Defender XDR, but it will still be available for them in the unified security operations platform portal. And at first I was like, why do you want to do that? If users are only using Sentinel and had nothing to do with the Defender stuff, why do you want to force them to use the quote unquote Defender portal to use Sentinel? Well, the big reason is a Copilot. Obviously, the security Copilot experience with all the Sentinel integration is not available in the Azure portal. You have to use the Defender portal for that. So at least it's. I'm not sure how I feel about this. On one end, I think it's good that you have the security Copilot integration, but I think if you're only using Sentinel and are not using any of the other Defender products, in my opinion, I think you should reevaluate to probably onboard those products instead of paying for security Copilot right away, right?
Do you think that part of that as well is to get folks familiar or to give them a little bit of a taste of what it could look like if they use the other products? So we give you the portal, but none of that stuff's active for you if you don't have a license, right? So you can if you click on
That's why I don't think it's how do you say that? It could be a smart upsell from Microsoft parts, right? But you don't have the data there when you're not paying for it. So all the tables are not visible. You don't have the full kill chain coverage of your detections, right? You don't have the great investigation graph covering all the different attack paths. So I'm not really sure. I think people only using Sentinel should really look into the other Defender stuff as well. But well, at least it's there. So not much announcement from that. I also see the role of Sentinel becoming a little bit different. When I started in Microsoft Security almost 6 years ago, Sentinel just went general available. But back then, we still had all the different portals from all the different Defender products. So Sentinel acted as a orchestrator, if you will, between all those different Defender products, pulling in all the alerts from all the products and visualizing them in the Sentinel UI. Now that everything has shifted to the Defender portal, which arguably a much better UI and nicer UI, Sentinel is hanging in there probably for your custom logs and getting some logs in Defender, like your Entra ID signing logs, for example, or perhaps Azure platform logs. But the whole UI of Sentinel, I think, will be less and less used over time, and people are switching to Defender instead.
Interesting.
So some other newer integrations in that portal are Purview Insider Risk Management that is now integrated in the incident page in Defender. And it appears, based on all the announcements we saw, that this is going to be a big year for data security. Don't you agree? So Purview and data security is a hot topic right now. I
think so. And I think that it's time that the rubber meets the road when it comes to this stuff, right? Because everyone's been saying when Copilot first came out, it was go use Copilot, and then people sort of said, "Oh, hang on, in order for us to use Copilot, we have to have our data estate in order, right?" And so that became the catchphrase of the last 18 months: is get your data estate in order. But no one really kind of defined what that actually means, because it's a difficult problem to solve. When you actually start digging into what does that actually mean, it's hard. Data security is a difficult problem. So I agree with you. I think there's going to be continued focus, because I think it is a barrier to entry. Like organizations are not going to jump on not every organization is going to jump on the Copilot bandwagon until they have these data bits and their data estate in order, if you will.
Yeah. And to be honest, I also struggle a bit with the onboarding part for my customers, because I'm 100% technical, right? So I like to build scripts and deploy and build stuff. And when it comes to Purview, you also have to embrace a lot of the business aspect of the product, right? So you have to go and have some decent discussions about how data is being used and what data lives where. And it's a completely different onboarding aspect compared to all the other Defender products, I would say.
Yeah. And again, those discussions are difficult because a lot of organizations don't actually know. So you get all of the business decision makers in a room, or the business owners in a room, and everyone wants to go away and figure it out. Like that, no one can give you the answers straight away, right? And that's quite common. So it's a very difficult problem to solve, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Microsoft does help you a little bit with it, but more on that later. I have another announcement on that on my list. But first, I want to touch on, I think, probably the most notable product becoming general available during Ignite, and that's Microsoft Security Exposure Management. And before I explain what it is, I think it's good to understand the different way attackers and defenders generally operate. Have you heard about the name John Lambert, Chris?
I've seen some of his stuff floating about, yes, but
Okay,
I don't know him personally.
No, so he's at Microsoft for over 24 years already. He started in the Windows security team, and later he led the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, known as Mystic. So he's really a big name when it comes to Microsoft security, and he has some great ideas on that. And he famously quoted once, "Defenders think in lists, and attackers think in graphs. As long as this is true, attackers win." And what he was actually saying with that is that defenders are mostly relying on a lot of lists. They have Excel sheets of all their resources. They have content management systems, CMDBs, all that kind of stuff with lists of resources they have and they need to maintain. But attackers don't have any access to those lists, right? They just breach your network. They land somewhere in the graph, as John called it. And the graph is actually a mesh network, right? Representing your network, your applications, your identities. And they just start to hack into the next point in that mesh network and laterally move and traverse across your networks and come by your crown jewels while they're at it, right? That's why John is emphasizing the fact that you have to think as an attacker as well, and you also have to make sure that are aware of those graphs and what your environment looks like. And that is actually what Microsoft Security Exposure Management will do for you. So it will help you understand your attack surface better. It will help you think like an attacker. And it will help you also prioritize actions to protect your most critical assets. And it does this by consolidating a lot of posture data, data from your endpoints, data from cloud, your identities, but also data, some vulnerabilities that might be there on your systems. What's also great is that Microsoft is not only leveraging on their own products in this case, they're also embracing third-party solutions. So you can connect ServiceNow, for example, where you might have your CMDB, and pull in that data as well to give you some kind of awareness and to build that graph. Also, Qualys, Rapid7 are supported, Tenable, and I noticed that Wiz and Palo Alto are coming soon, so they will integrate that along the way. And then to present the data to you, it actually consists of three key components. So they have the attack surface management. This will visualize that graph, and this is what gives you the attacker's perspective of your organization, right? So you see the nice mesh network with all your applications, identities, endpoint servers, and whatnot. And then the second thing is the attack path analysis. And this will highlight how attackers could potentially abuse your exposures and security gaps. And it will show you how an attacker could potentially traverse their way through your organization and find your most critical assets. And then you have the unified exposure insights, and this will get you some metrics and scores. And it will score you based on some security initiatives, like the cloud endpoint security, ransomware protection, and zero trust. So this will help you prioritize a list. So, okay, these are the things I get to start working on right away to close a couple of those traversal points, right? So Microsoft Security Exposure Management not only went GA, but it also got a couple of updates during Ignite along the way. So apparently DACL support was now added. I had to look that up. It was a long time when I was using Windows permissions, Chris.
Yep. Yes.
You're aware of those?
I am. Yes, I'm in the middle of a project at the moment where I'm doing some work on DACLs and ACLs and all the rest of it.
Okay, well, the DACLs are now also supported, and they can pull them into the security exposure management. And also hybrid attack path are now added. So now Microsoft will try and capture routes that originate from on-premises networks as well. And I think this is a really great addition to the Defender suite. It will really help customers, if they pay attention to it, of course, to pinpoint their most critical failures, if you will.
I think this is interesting because this is also Microsoft admitting that not everyone is going to be cloud native right away, right?
Yeah.
We've been on this hybrid journey now for a decade, and there are some organizations that are going to continue on being hybrid and using hybrid. So I like that they are looking at this, because the reality is as well is that most of our cloud infrastructures are secured in some way, right? Active Directory, on the other hand, and some of the on-premises stuff is 20-year-old, 24-year-old attack surface, right? It's not as good. So good to see that. I like the sort of attack path analysis stuff. It reminds me very much of what Bloodhound does. You know what I mean? It builds out that graph for you, and it shows you what that sort of path to exposure looks like. So very cool that Microsoft's kind of sort of working on
and I also think it's a great place to make customers aware of security gaps in the sense of vulnerabilities, for example. Although customers are trying to embrace cloud and all the security products, I still see in practice a lot of servers running old applications, old plugins. I even saw at a customer lately Firefox 1.0 installed on most of their endpoints because some kind of printer driver came with it or something like that. Wow. And those come with obviously a lot of critical vulnerabilities, and I think this will give you some proper insight in how big the holes are in your security and what needs to be done first.
Yeah, no, very good. I'm glad you brought that one up.
Yeah, well, to close off, I actually cobbled together a lot of other new updates, but it's obviously the Book of Ignite, the Book of News. Ignite Book of News is actually quite long, so we couldn't state every single update in here. But I want to go through a couple of other updates still. So apparently, Defender for Office 365 got a new AI-powered LLM-based detection thingy. Not sure if you've seen that. This is something you don't need Security Copilot for security for, as far as I could find. So this is actually baked in the product. And Microsoft actually promises not. They have seen quite impressive results, up to 99.995% of malicious emails being able to be filtered with this new LLM-based detection.
This is very important, and I think because honestly, I've been seeing in the last 6 months or 9 months or so is that Defender for Office 365 by itself is not enough anymore. Right. Yeah. I've definitely seen, we've gone through this sort of phase where customers were using third-party mail filtering, and EOP, Defender, all of that stuff was really good. And we were saying, why don't you reuse this investment that you have in Microsoft technology and bring that stuff in and get rid of the third party and invest that money elsewhere? And customers have done that. But the reality is that it's by itself, it was struggling, right? We've seen other technologies, the sort of AI or sort of API integration. Sublime is one of them. Needed to sort of layer on top of what Defender was doing. So I'm really pleased to see this, and especially if they're seeing really good results, I think that's great.
Yeah, and this also had to do apparently with obviously attackers using LLMs AI to generate these phishing emails as well, so that they became much better and they're not in the janky English format anymore. So yeah, I think it's great. So another thing that got updated is Defender Cloud Security Posture Management. That's a whole mouthful of words, but it will give you some insights in your cloud security posture. Not only Microsoft Azure, but also AWS and Google Cloud Platform as well. And it got some new additions like API security posture. So it will actually map the APIs from your API management back to the actual servers and applications and even storage and compute. So that's great. Container security got an update. So now on all Azure, AWS, and Google, it will scan for your container registries when you build container instances. And also AI security posture was added. So even if you use your own OpenAI service or Azure Machine Learning, but also Amazon Bedrock, I'm not familiar with that, but apparently that's Amazon's AI studio solution, can be monitored by the cloud security posture management nowadays. Microsoft also launched their 0-day quest. Have you seen that, Chris?
No, I haven't actually. I
No.
missed this one.
Okay, so apparently they created a big pot with $4 million in it, and they actually started right at Ignite, and up until the January 19th, which is actually my birthday, by the way, they have a hacking event, and according to Microsoft, it's the largest in its kind. So you can submit bugs in all kinds of products, not only AI, also Microsoft 365 and Defenders, and you can earn bug bounties up to the 4 million is not one single bug bounty, of course, but they have a whole document on it. So if red teamers are listening to this, they should probably definitely check it out.
Wow, yeah, jeez, it's like Pwn to Own on steroids, right? If it lasts for 2 months.
Yeah. And they actually invite I believe the top 10 or something, they invite them to Redmond to come to an actual in-person hacking event as well. So that's nice. So Purview will receive an ability, new capabilities to prevent oversharing of sensitive information. Again, this is a data security thing. Purview data security posture management is now in preview. And again, another posture management, but focused on data security. And this is what I mentioned earlier in the podcast. This will provide you a visibility across all the Purview data security solutions in one piece. And it can tell you if you probably have that G drive somewhere on a file server, which you probably need to label and migrate elsewhere. Well, you already touched on a couple of Copilot things which were new, and also Copilot obviously in more products. You already touched on Entra and Intune, and also Purview got its own Copilot now. Lastly, I want to touch on a couple of things from Security Copilot perspective for the Defenders. I think it's really nice that when you have a security incident in Defender and some kind of script was involved in there, that Copilot will automatically detail for you to the security analyst what the script is actually trying to do. And so if it's PowerShell or Python or whatever, it will actually explain to you what it tries to do. Incident report will now also compile all of the response activities in a detailed report for you. And it also comes with integration with ServiceNow, so it can write back the report to ServiceNow, if you will. And also there's a way to use a guided response. So security analysts have to communicate with end users sometime, and the guided response will help them communicate more easily by dynamically generating some text for them they can send out to the user, for example. I don't have any experience with it yet. These are all new, but I saw some demos on it and could be useful. When it comes to Security Copilot, I do have a little bit of mixed feelings still, and that mostly comes down to the pricing. Well, you mentioned that you don't have much experience with it yet, but I've seen a lot of very expensive SCUs being deployed. And even when companies started to use it, it's difficult to know beforehand how much compute units you will be needing actually. Microsoft has some documentation on that. They will probably advise you to start with a certain number, and you can scale up and down, of course. But the amount of prompts and the amount of compute that go through it, especially because it's so integrated so much now, the compute units are all the time working for you, even if you don't know it. If you open up a pane, there comes a summary. When you open up an incident, another summary pops up, and there are all prompts, of course, being computed for you. And I see customers really struggling with the cost perspective of it. So
I think it's an important call out, right? Because I think we all get caught up in the demos of the stuff
Yeah.
where it's seamless, and the person demoing this is writing this prompt out, and he's right clicking on this thing, and he's asking for more information there. And like you said, the back end work on all of these prompts is enormous, and there's a lot going on, especially as we start seeing these the security copilot stuff get integrated into the admin centers that we already use. It's very easy to get carried away and just go crazy with this, right, without actually understanding the cost implications under the covers. And like I said, I mentioned earlier, like as techies, we don't always consider the costs of this, right? We look at the benefit and we go, this is fantastic, but hey, someone's got to pay the bill for this. So I think it's an important call out that, I think two things. One, you really have to understand what you're getting into, or at least try and best understand what you're getting into when you jump into the stuff. But two, you can't go from zero to hero with this, right? You can't have an organization where you're struggling with basic security concepts and then jump into a AI assisted security workflow where all your folks are all of a sudden now have the magic of AI. Like there has to be a maturity that comes with it, right? And that takes time, and it is a journey, and I think that's important.
I would advise people listening wanting to try out Security Copilot. What is actually great, since it's an Azure resource, you can deploy it and remove it right after you don't use it anymore. So there are a couple of examples online of pipeline deployments, automated deployments, where you could deploy, for example, a couple of SCUs to try them out and automatically remove them at the end of your working day. Then at least you're not paying for it 24/7, right? Or just deploy it and remove it by hand after you've finished tinkering with it. At least then you can get a feel of what it can give you.
I think that's a really good call out. Really good.
So lastly, I think we want to touch on a community project of this episode, right? We always like to highlight something else in the community, which is worth mentioning. And since I was already touching on workbooks a little bit earlier, the first thing that came to my mind was the Entra ID Security Config Analyzer. And this was actually made by three guys, Sami, Thomas, and Marcus. Sami and Marcus are from Finland, and Thomas is operating out of Germany. I'm following Sami for a long time already. He's a security MVP as well, and he's bringing some great contributions to the community. And those three guys have created the Entra ID Security Config Analyzer, which is a project with a lot of stuff, to set up the best practices. But one of which is a workbook, actually, which you can deploy, and it will give you insights, and it will evaluate your Entra ID tenant settings with several best practices. Think about things like MFA and the things we touched on earlier. But I think it's a great starting point to get into optimizing your Entra ID settings to get them more secure.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I have not seen this before, and I think this is really, really useful. So I'm definitely going to be having a little bit of a play around with this this week. See what I can.
We'll make sure that the links end up in the show notes, of course.
Fantastic. Thanks for bringing that up, Koos. That's really, really, really helpful. Well, that's a lot there, right? Even though you think that there wasn't all that much in the security space at Ignite. We've only really just scratched the surface. We will put a link to the Ignite Book of News. That Book of News has also just grown a lot over the years, hasn't it? Like I remember when it was just a PDF, and you could download it as a PDF, and you could skim through it in a few minutes. Now it's a whole sort of encompassing book of news for Ignite. So it's fantastic. It also each section will link to blog posts about the announcement. It'll link to relevant sessions for the announcement, so you can go and actually follow up on videos and recordings, on demand recordings of those announcements and things. It's really worth looking at if you weren't at Ignite, obviously, but even if you were at Ignite, it's a great way to refresh or see some of the things that you maybe missed out on because you were in other sessions, right? So definitely.
Yeah, another fun fact I want to touch on, Chris. So Microsoft yearly releases the Digital Defense Report. It came out at the end of October again this year. And one of the facts I noticed there that Microsoft has now 34,000 security engineers working in the company to build and work on the security product. So if you think they're slowing down on developing security products, you're wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've said for a long time, I think Microsoft is the biggest security vendor in the world, right? I just don't think everyone wants to acknowledge that, but I really do think it's true given the investment that they're putting into this. So,
certainly, absolutely. Okay.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode. As always, please feel free to reach out to us on the socials if you have any burning questions or if you just like to get in touch. We really enjoy putting this together for you. So we appreciate you following us on this journey, and I'm sure you will see us or hear from us again soon with another episode.
In the next year, I guess. So happy holidays, everybody. That's
right. Happy holidays. I'm not sure when exactly this one will be published, but it'll be around just after Christmas time. So, for those of you, I hope you enjoy your time with family and, downtime. I think downtime is very important for the old mental health, right? So take care about that. Take care. And Koos, great to see you again as always. Thank you for joining me. And we'll talk to you all. We'll see you all again later.
Nice holidays, Chris. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.